Welcome. Today we'll be discussing getting ahead with AI, revolutionizing organizations. According to Satya Nadella, AI is the defining technology of our times. And just this week, multiple sources are saying that the president is expected to sign a broad executive order on Monday, October 30th, that is focused on regulating AI use. The order would come just before the top officials are gathering for an international summit of the technology. According to Government Technology magazine, there have been extensive discussions among experts on the best way for the federal government to regulate AI use. Last year, the Biden and Harris administration published a voluntary AI Bill of Rights. In state government, states are taking a measured approach to this tech. Some states, including Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Oklahoma, have already established executive orders of their own to manage risks. Considering some of the questions we received in advance for this session today, we know there are some real concerns. So let's talk about some of these today. With me today is Miguel Wood, who you probably recognize and is our resident data savant and previous presenter on topics like modernizing enterprise data analytics, enabling unified data governance across all your data sources, modernizing the data estate with Microsoft Enterprise Data Strategies, cost savings using Azure SQL hybrid benefits, and in June, Miguel gave us an overview of Microsoft Fabric. If you haven't seen it, please check them out. Most recently, Miguel has been working with Microsoft on an AI roadshow across the country. For more information about today's program and some of the past blogs, check out our Cloud Office Hour recordings and blog site. Welcome, Miguel, and everyone. We are so glad you're joining us on the program today. We have a full agenda, so let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Ken. I appreciate it. So we are going to go ahead and kind of give a quick overview of kind of what we'll be doing on the agenda. We're going to go over AI foundations. If we actually say AI or artificial intelligence, there is a lot of confusing information. A lot of people don't understand just kind of the basics. So I'm going to cover that very briefly, and then I'm going to dive into the Microsoft AI portfolio. I am going to try and touch on everything. I do have those questions that have been submitted prior, and I will do my best to I'll ensure I answer all of those. Of course, more questions are definitely invited, and you're welcome to go ahead and do those. I will also go into a couple use cases, not only a very detailed use case, but also some typical, if you will, what we're seeing as far as initial or architectures on how we use this. And then, of course, any questions, feedback, and or next steps. So, if I wanted to go ahead and try and, how do I actually define artificial intelligence? So most of the people are talking today about AI. They're thinking about the chat GPT or sometimes even the visual creation of visuals. All of these are based off of large language models. And so kind of have to start with that. But before I do that, artificial intelligence is literally techniques that computers can actually complete tasks that would otherwise require human intelligence. So this is not automation. This is not where it's a repetitive task that does not take human intelligence to do. These are specifically meant to generate, answer questions, and recognize things as well. Even in the Microsoft AI space, all we're hearing, a lot of people only think about the OpenAI. We're going to talk about some of those other things that really fall under and what Microsoft is currently calling their cognitive services or AI platform, specifically also in Azure. But you're seeing it proliferate through everything, including the copilots, and even today, even in Bing Chat and or Bing Chat Enterprise, if you're aware of that as well. So again, the most of the AI that we're talking about or that people are talking about today is based off these large language models. So I'm going to do this very quickly. 1950s is when we truly came up with the term artificial intelligence. In the late 1950s, we have machine learning. And by the way, machine learning even today is a very, very powerful thing that a lot of organizations still don't take advantage of even now. The challenges back then, and as we proceeded on, was how much compute power it took to complete and utilize some of these technologies. Obviously, the cloud has changed that as far as availability of compute. We get into deep learning, and this is where you start seeing some of the techniques, again, based on the data. And we're going to talk a lot about data because AI, just by the models, the base models that we'll be utilizing, that's only a subset of data. When we want to harness AI, we want to be able to use our data but we also want to make sure that it stays secure and it's only my data that's being used. Now today, what we're talking about is generative AI, and we really saw that kind of bubble up in 2021, but with the release of OpenAI and Microsoft's implementation of that, especially with this huge partnership with OpenAI, interesting enough, and it's no secret, Microsoft has taken the lead in AI across the board. And I want to be very careful. We'll actually talk about some other types of AI that Microsoft, not just OpenAI. It's definitely not just the OpenAI ChatGPT or DALL-E and everything else that OpenAI brings to the table. But they've been invested, obviously, in OpenAI for quite a while. So, first thing, if I'm going to use AI for my data, what do I need to be aware of? So Microsoft has been a leader not only in the AI technical space, but also in the governance of the use of AI. Microsoft calls this responsible AI. We'll see just kind of what their pillars have been around, and those were defined by Satya several years ago. But with the Microsoft Cloud, if you haven't used Azure, I'm sure everyone has probably on this call or are considering using it. Your data is your data. You are obviously also, as much as Microsoft does its best to protect it, you also are in control of what it can be and how it can be protected. The data that you have does not fine-tune any of the base foundation models, those large language models. When we talk about we'll get specific on like ChatGPT 3.5 or ChatGPT 4, your data that's in your environment, in your tenants, does not feed those base models. It either infers or embeds, and I'm using some terms we'll talk about and define here in just a few minutes, or even to the extent of fine-tuning it or fine-training it, if you will. And so remember, not only can by default you use Microsoft managed keys to protect your data, but you're also able to bring your own keys to encrypt that data so that even Microsoft couldn't even get to it. And again, there's many other security, compliance, and governance controls built into the Azure platform, the Azure cloud.
Yeah, Miguel, we had a lot of questions about that. Hopefully this answered most of them. If not, we'll get to them in the questions and answer section though, but thank you for that.
Yes, well, and I'm going to have more specifics. I have some links specifically that I want to share with people on a couple of those questions. And I'll read those questions when we actually get the question and answer. Sure. And provide those links. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Excellent.
So, I think we already did that one.
We already talked about this. We'll move on.
Yes, we did. Yeah. All right. So when we talk about types of AI, this is just kind of this is why we have so much confusion around artificial intelligence, is because there are many different types of AI. And if we take a look at the broad term of AI, a lot of people confuse it with machine learning. I would say AI is a superset of machine learning, but there's a lot of things that we can take a look at, whether it be the representation, the robotics, computer vision, being able to identify and recognize images and types of images, and even objects within images. Most people right now are thinking of it around knowledge-based systems just because of the use that seems to be prolific throughout media and what people are talking about, but you're also seeing it for other things. The one thing I will tell you that even our clients and customers are struggling with is, I want to use AI, but they are unsure of, okay, how do I use it, or what do I use it, or what's my use case? And that arguably is going to be, we don't have, because we're kind of on this cusp, a lot of these new use cases. I get to hear about some use cases that just kind of, when I'm working with customers, that they've truly come up with some very unique pieces that I think that will, or solutions that will change their industry, their vertical, and even impact even probably cross-vertical as well. So keep in mind, when we talk about this, we're going to focus in obviously on the Microsoft platform and how it can actually change and enable our organizations, but there is a lot out there. So as I mentioned just a few slides ago, these are the Microsoft's responsible AI principles that were defined several years ago by Satya. Specifically, your inclusiveness, accountability, transparency, fairness, reliability and safety, and privacy and security. Microsoft has an entire dedicated area on their website about this. And each of these are very critical because this is what Microsoft is driving to. inclusiveness. And you'll see out of the box, there's some things that you can't ask they won't let be used by default. For instance, asking how to create a bomb, or I'm using some very drastic examples here, or how to do criminal activity. Now, there are use cases, however, where there may be organizations that need to understand and be able to research on some of that, and those require a significant gate to go through for Microsoft to kind of what we call content filtering in the AI engines to actually drop those or remove those or modify them. So keep that in mind. The one thing I want to make sure, though, on the right-hand side, other than the responsible AI principles or topics on the left, is what do we need to deal with? Governance, and this is not technical. We can use technical solutions to assist us in getting and enabling and enforcing these, but rules and then training and practices, your users are going to, this is a completely different way of working. And we're not going to do, there's a lot of videos out there, for instance, on the Copilots and some of these other things, that your users are going to have to be enabled to learn and get the knowledge of getting the most out of the AI. And then, of course, tools and processes above that. So if you, next slide, please. One other thing I want to go ahead and mention on this is it's built into the Azure AI engine. And I should say Microsoft AI, because this does literally move over into people when they don't think about the Azure, although that's the back end of obviously Copilot and everything else. These things are all going to be inherent in any of the Microsoft AI technologies that you enable within your organization. Next slide, please. Now, when utilizing or getting the most out of artificial intelligence, it's going to be built, and probably should be built, off of your data. And if your data is in that cloud, in the Azure cloud, what Microsoft now refers to as its Microsoft Intelligent Data Platform, we see that it truly is, we have to have data governance. We probably going to move into analytics. We're going to have operational databases, and all that can feed into that intelligent platform. But because it's built on the Azure cloud, we have the security, the compliance, the RBAC, and optionally even an enterprise data governance. But a lot of people are coming to us and saying, hey, we want to go ahead and enable AI in our organizations. If your data is not ready, or it's not governed and it's not secured, you could be in it's trying to put the cart before the horse. So this is an extension, or should be the next step after you ensure that your data platform, your data estate, as I used in some of my previous You Already Own It webinars, is very, very critical. You want to make sure that it's modern and it's governed and handled properly from a management perspective. All right, let's get into some specifics here. So when we talk about the hierarchy of output, and this is going to kind of bubble up to where we're talking about what most people are considering. So raw input. So some of these examples would be, hey, I need to go ahead and collect these images, text, and sensor data, and I want to gather the multimedia content for a presentation. You can see this in Copilot for PowerPoint right now today, and it generates these incredible PowerPoints and presentations, but it's going out and gathering that information from whatever the base model or what the base model has available to it. Above that, AI, we have machine learning. And so that's where we start thinking of identifying patterns and relationships. A lot of people initially, especially like in retail or commercial, this would be figuring out, hey, what's my customer going to buy? Or what can I take the existing data set and train it so that I can put it on new data and get some predefined or patterns and relationships what I can expect. So the example here, of course, is taking a look at organizational performance trends through pattern recognition based on the KPIs that they're meeting within their organization. Above that, we have deep learning. Now, this is where we're going to start moving into where we get to the basis of AI as we know it today, where that neural network is used to develop personalized treatment plans, right? Based on the machine learning, but then going above and beyond and applying that above it. And then next would be the generative AI. And this is where was that last piece that we talked about when we're looking at the AI and where we're at. So now we're going to do complex language understanding to basically have full-blown conversations, human-like conversations, using that natural language processing to create that defined feedback. This is one of the first ones we're seeing as far as solutions that being repeatable through our customers and throughout the world actually right now. But it's still just a very we're only scratching the surface. It's a very, very basic use case, if that makes sense. And then of course hallucinations, and now you're going to find out that hallucinations was not. It is actually a term that is used, because I was looking at the poll answers. Yes, we did trick some people in response to specific tasks. Really quick, since I mentioned hallucinations, what hallucinations are in the generative AI space is when I am asking the AI to get a little too creative. And this is where it starts making stuff up. If you've been paying attention to the media, you've seen some of this around the negative. The funny thing is that that's controlled based on your model that you're actually using. So I can, even within Azure OpenAI, I can say, hey, I want this thing to be super creative or not. You want an example of that? If you go to Bing Chat and you punch in a question, you'll notice there's basically 3 different sections you can click on to say, hey, do I want this to be creative, or do I want it to be balanced, or do I want it to be more precise? More precise means I am limiting or taking away any hallucinations, and those hallucinations are where we actually start seeing the AI start making stuff up. We've seen that. I think the most recent one I read about was someone who was using it for a legal preparation. Next slide, please, Ken. So let's take a look at this big Microsoft AI portfolio, because it is fairly significant. At the bottom, as I mentioned, AI and in Microsoft Azure world, you'll see that bucket all be jumped into what's known as cognitive services. Okay, but below that is our machine learning platform, Delta Lakes or Data Lakes, where my data or the analysis engines within Synapse or Fabric, if you're paying attention to what's going on there. And then of course we even have the Azure machine learning as well. In the cognitive service space, everyone's focused right now on OpenAI, but there's a whole bunch of other things that we have, whether that be speech recognition, whether that be speech to text or translation services in language, decision making, and or vision. There's some very powerful vision artificial intelligence or cognitive services pieces there as well. This is where OpenAI sits, and you will see additional, if you're not seeing them already, you will see other things besides OpenAI that falls into this cognitive services bucket. And that's how they're currently kind of breaking that out. But we don't just enabling a resource or a service in the AI, we have to make that available to our platforms, to our users. And so above that, you're going to have some other things that complement or are necessary to get to the solutions, the overall solutions you're going to have. The bots, and everyone's familiar with what a bot is, and being able to embed that in Teams. The cognitive search. This is very, very critical. I'll get into this as to why, but being able to search, and it used to be called enterprise search, and take your content, your text-based content, to make it available to be able to infer or utilize and pass into the OpenAI model that you've created in your organization. Video indexer, obviously dealing with vision. Form recognizer. There was a customer we're talking to right now that is looking to basically kind of do something with their expense reports and automate that process. And that may not necessarily need to have OpenAI. So we need to be careful, because everyone's saying, oh, just throw OpenAI at it. It's not necessarily that. But what I do want to key in on is that any solution you have, and you'll see this in the architectures near the end of this presentation, is going to be utilizing other sources, other resources and services to provide that to your users. And of course, we start seeing some of that above in the Power Platform and or applications above that as well. So let's talk about Copilot. Everyone's talking about Copilot. The only one on here that is that if you haven't been working with and it's truly released is the GitHub Copilot. So any coders that are not yet using GitHub Copilot, unfortunately, my role today, I don't get to do a lot of coding. But when I do, and not only professionally, but as some of my side things I like to do, my coding experience has gotten better than even when I was a true coder. And when I get to talk to developers that are using GitHub Copilot and the preview of GitHub Copilot Chat, it is amazing. It in such a small amount of time, I can create code that I may have spent days or hours searching for the right, or even writing that code, and it just spits it out. So our development has been impacted. The Microsoft 365 Copilot, I would assume that if you're in this, even interested in this, if you haven't seen the videos from Microsoft or some of the things out there on YouTube that they provide all their videos through, I would highly suggest that. The Power BI piece, Copilot, is phenomenal. You're also seeing, and you saw the announcement for the Microsoft Security Copilot as well. All of these Copilots are essentially utilizing the front-end app to access the cognitive services, or most of the tech space will be OpenAI backed, to be able to enhance and make our work much more efficient. I've linked. There's links in this here for all to get information on all of these as well in this deck, and when you're able to get that. All right, Bing Chat Enterprise. So if you have not, so really quick. So everyone has it. If you've got A3 or A5 or Business Standard, Microsoft 365 or Business Premium, or the E3, E5. So you have that available to you, right? So what's very important, and I'm going to put because I didn't want to jump out and have Ken get all messed up and trying to come back, I'm going to put in the chat an image that kind of shows what that looks like. And specifically, my question that I spit out in there was, who is or what is Planet Technologies? So in there, you can take a look in the chat, and I'm pointing out a couple pieces of that Bing Chat Enterprise. And I literally did this just before our presentation. You'll notice up in the upper right-hand corner, I am signed in with my organizational account that has one of those licensing options you have up there in the right hand on the slide. But every interaction I have, whether I'm going to or whether I'm coming from, in other words, I'm asking a question or I'm getting the results back, that data that I'm providing and getting back is protected. In other words, it does not do anything. Microsoft doesn't store it. It doesn't go to feed the underlying engine. And just to get a little bit more detail, because we'll talk more about the models in just a few minutes. Keep in mind that this is based off of ChatGPT-4, and all that they've done, and I want you to understand this because I'm talking about when we start using our data, is taken the Bing index, the internet index, and using it to infer the prompts and responses into or back to you in that. By the way, that's the same thing for Bing Chat. If you're not using Bing Chat Enterprise, your data is not guaranteed to be protected. So my suggestion, if you're not using it, definitely use it, one, if in an organization that has that, and then ensure that you put in proper controls to ensure their users are using the Bing Chat Enterprise and not using using the other ones. The same thing for ChatGPT. If you're a ChatGPT subscriber, I am and have been. You have the ChatGPT-4 model from OpenAI. Those are not protected either, and those do help to feed the model. Now, why is that so important? When I get into the versions of the ChatGPT model, specifically, we'll talk about why we would want to have up-to-date indexing of either our content or in the Bing Chat Enterprise, why that's important. Go ahead. All right, you can go ahead and go through this whole thing really quick. I want to make sure you kind of start getting ideas of what these capabilities and use cases are. So on the very bottom, I've put some examples of multiple model use cases. I will tell you just a couple. The first and the third, we have literally are do projects or have done projects on that already. It doesn't take a lot of work depending on where you are with your data and your application platform. But from a content image generation, from a summarization, being able to take a call center, and that first example down at the bottom, it says classification, sentiment, entity extraction, summarization, and email generation, responding to them. When we get to the example, the more detailed example I have near the end of the presentation, we're going to talk about using this in healthcare. And so on code generation, I don't even have to go to a specific, not even in GitHub. A lot of that can be done right off the model. So I want to take a question and here's my, maybe provide more information as to what kind of table or what my data source is. And then, hey, spit out the SQL for me. This will be and this is why the Copilot for Power BI, because it's going to do all that for you. Heck, it's not even going to do that. It's going to generate a phenomenal report for you with all the visuals and connect to your source. With Fabric, this is going to even get much more interesting because you'll be able to access all your enterprise sources as well. And then finally, advanced search. So those are just, I want to make very, very, very clear. This is just some ideas and it's just capabilities that we have and we're seeing right now. Like I said, I had a call with a potential customer last week, and their thought and their use case for what they wanted to do with artificial intelligence for their solution, it's mind blowing. And it's like, why didn't anyone else think about that? Next. All right. So again, let's talk about, I'm going to focus now. We've talked about Copilot. We've talked about Bing Chat Enterprise. We're going to jump into the Azure OpenAI service here. So remember, this is a large pre-trained foundation AI models. When I get down to the specifics, it'll be Chat 3.5. Chat 3.5 Turbo is what it's called in the actual model. You've got Chat GPT-4. You've got Codex, which is really the generative coding model. Think of that that's really what's being behind GitHub. And then you have the visual pieces, both DALL-E, and we're now dealing with DALL-E 2, and Valley as well. And those help generate images. Some of these are going to start, you're going to see the interaction or utilization of those on in the same time. So in other words, I'll be able to go using ChatGPT and or DALL-E to go ahead and bring back both images and content or generative text as well. Now, those are the base models, but we can extend it or add to it with our custom data, parameterize it the way we want to. Maybe I want it to be very creative. Then I would actually go ahead and kick up the I'm not going to talk about the specific parameters, but I can make it more creative. Or I can say, hey, this is a chatbot. I am a government organization, and I'm exposing a chatbot based on all our contents for an FAQ for our citizens. Well, that's definitely not something you want to be creative on. You're going to probably go ahead and crank that back down to be more precise and only pull and only be very, very factual as to what those are. Additionally, of course, if you do expose that content, it can be generative, as in it's conversation with your citizen, but then also have links directly to your source. You could have links to files available on your website or something like that if you're going to do a chatbot in a web app. Next slide, please. So let's take a look at those three different pieces. You'll notice everyone wants to use the latest and greatest. As these versions of ChatGPT are available, the higher you go, they are using many more or much more compute power. So there's two sides of that. One is because it's using more compute power, it's going to be more expensive to cost. And here's an interesting thing. Everyone always asks, well, how much is the OpenAI service going to cost? How much is it going to be for me to turn up ChatGPT-4 and turn it on and make it available? Well, ChatGPT-4 is the most expensive, but it may not be necessary for you for what you're trying to do. I will tell you, for instance, for that FAQ example I just gave about a government organization that's creating a chatbot for their citizens, ChatGPT probably would suffice if it's using your index of your data. The other downside of that, so one being more expensive, is because it's using more compute power, you'll also notice that the response from the API is also going to be slower. Not not like super slow, but it will be noticeable compared to a smaller model. We're going to talk about tokens. That was another term that if you answered tokens, that is a true piece. And so the token limit is really what you're being charged for. The other thing, and I'm not going to go specifically in the pricing, you can get that on the Azure Pricing Calculator public website or application, but you are charged by the tokens that you are utilizing, both in, so tokens in and tokens out. And we'll define tokens here in just a few minutes as well. One other thing I should mention, there are, in Azure OpenAI, there are multiple model versions of these. For instance, ChatGPT 3.5 had a version that I used initially with all those workshops that Ken mentioned that I was delivering with Microsoft, where the version was 0301, meaning that it was released to OpenAI or to Azure OpenAI on March 1st. At that time, we only had 3 regions that had the OpenAI service available. Now there are many more regions that have that available, and they will be, and they'll be adding more. But the new version of ChatGPT 3.5 is 0614, which of course corresponds to June 14th. Now, one more thing I should add to this, and I'm going to be very transparent. You're still using the same model. They're not going to take that away because applications are dependent on using that model, but they also changed the API signature for calling that. So if I simply said I want to use a ChatGPT 3.5 0614, I would have to ensure that I went to all the API calls to the OpenAI service and change that as well. So I don't think that's going to happen a lot, but you do need to be aware of that. So it's deprecated. And so as they add these new regions, that 0301 will not show up. You won't see that version. But where they did have it, and I'll go ahead and reference East US, and you enabled it, it will be there and will stay there. Now it's not one of the options you can even create a model on because it's going to be the newest model, which is 0614 right now. Next slide, please. Okay, now with all these pros, let's also talk about the cons of GPT. One, it's not always right. Do not consider it an expert in everything, because if you're using a model or you're using an API that they've cranked up the creativity, more than likely, especially if it's very complex, there's going to be something incorrect in there. It's the same thing that we talk about using it for any other AI engine. You can use it and create content that would have taken you 2-3 weeks to do, but you do still want to check the work. The same thing with code. If I'm using code, I've run across already situations where the base model didn't know about new changes in versions of APIs, etc. So that you do have to ensure you understand what that is, and it's best if you do know where that creativity, or what we call temperature, there's actually 2 different ones we can use, is set on the scale for replying. Logic lapses. There can be some big reasoning mistakes. There's been some media about that when it's dealing with difficulties on answering simple math questions. The other thing you need to be aware of is very unlikely that it will answer the same way the next time. Remember, this is a human. If I ask you a question, more than likely, if it's some type of verbal response and lengthy, and I ask another human the exact same question, it's not going to be the same answer, right? This is a challenge. So ChatGPT 4, September, or actually end of September 2021. Now, this is one of those things. If I simply use ChatGPT 4 and I go to OpenAI and I use that chat, and I ask it who won the ALCS, which of course my Texas Rangers did, it wouldn't know anything about it because that data wasn't inferred. However, Bing Chat or Bing Chat Enterprise has the index of the Bing index behind it, and of course can infer that and give information back that says, yes, the Rangers won, they're going to the World Series, the first game's tomorrow night, right here in Dallas and Arlington. So that is sorry?
I said, don't rub it in.
Sorry, by the way, I do live in Dallas, so I'm definitely going to rub it in a little bit. And my best friend lives in Houston, so I am going to enjoy it while I can. It's been too long since we've been there. So yes. It also doesn't. So again, that's a benefit of using Bing Chat Enterprise or Bing Chat, right? It's also a benefit of using your own data if you have your own OpenAI or ChatGPT model that you're utilizing within your organization. Blind to copying. I don't care what. So I do a lot of work with EDU, and in the EDU space, that seems to be the biggest thing. I don't want anyone to plagiarize, or I don't want them to use ChatGPT to create stuff. Guys, it's going to happen. And as much as people say that they have tools that can determine it, no tool is 100% at doing that. In fact, I would say even some of them would be 70, 80. How could I actually train that? I would have to take content that the child or the specific person created and then compare that. That's the only way that you could probably even get a higher percentage of what that looks like. It cannot detect plagiarism. This is where we're seeing a lot of discussion around ethics and everything else within AI. Last thing, imaging facts, both ChatGPT 4 and 3.5 can hallucinate, and that's where I talk about that creativity or make stuff up, okay? By the way, these some of these images, everything that you see as far as images in here, I've been working with Michael Jabor, who's the Chief Innovation Officer for Microsoft in the U.S. education space, and so a lot of this comes from his work with this. Go ahead.
Isn't it correct though that the Google and the Microsoft versions of generative AI will be current and not be limited to September 2021?
Yes. So as we get another version, so each version of the ChatGPT model, or let me specific that, or anything else would be. What depends, you're talking about the web pace, the web interaction or chat, and that's why I wanted to make sure. So the Bing and the Google are going to have their base model is restricted to the date that it was trained on the content that was available at that date. What they're doing then is they are taking the index, basically a textual index, and using that to be on top of the base model so they can actually reply with that information, right? The next version, say ChatGPT 5, it's not going to be based on, it's being trained now, but it's not going to have content up to the time that it actually is made available publicly. You'll always have a laggard, well, not always, but right now, just the amount of compute that takes to take that in, and we're talking billions and trillions now. We're going to probably jump up into mid-trillions to possibly even 10 trillions. There's almost been an order of magnitude each time for each version of the model of the parameters are actually being fed and actually trained. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, by the way? So when you use Google or you use Bing, they're still, the base models are not trained up to, they are not trained up to modern, to today. They're simply just being enhanced by being able to access the index from either Google search, I guess, or from Bing search, right? So let's talk about a couple more key terms. And you know what, Ken, go ahead and just kind of take that all that. So I'm giving the instructions here, and that's a prompt, that whole block there. Extract the mailing address from this email, blah, blah, blah. I appreciate it for book, blah, blah, and then the completion. So my question or my command to the chat was, completion is, there's your address. I pulled it out and extracted it. Now, what you're seeing on the other side, on the far side, is tokens. So tokens are partial or full words that are basically broken down and utilized by the engine to feed it into the engine. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to get into the complex math of vectors and embeddings here, but this is also going to be, you can almost think of it as a one word or group of letters or group of characters to be a token, but it's not truly that way. Okay, this is where we get into some of the complex indexing that occurs with getting the model and getting the data and then feeding it to that. Next slide, please. Again, I'm going to kind of speed through this a little bit. So the idea behind a prompt is I've got task description, as you saw before. What's the address? If I want to provide example input, and then example output is optional as well, and then the user input specifically. So text would be classified text in a neutral, negative, positive. Text, context is a text. I want it to be sentiment, and the user input, I think the food is okay. So that could be maybe coming from a call log or something, and the output would be this text can be classified as neutral. Okay. Next. And I've got some other examples here from a textual perspective as well as from an image perspective. Now, what we're seeing on the far left is basically what we call a single shot, right tagline for ice cream shop. Then I actually have on the second one is a multi-shot where I'm actually saying, I'm having trouble getting in the Xbox to turn on, blah, blah, blah. Here's my response. Thanks, that worked. But what games do you recommend? And it will actually continue with the tokens and everything that was processed before and answer more for that because I'm kind of on that same thread. And then, of course, the last one, or the third one, is around code. This is a perfect example. Here's an example of the table that's defined. Now create a SQL query for all the customers in Texas named Miguel. And there's my query. And then, of course, the last one being visual. Next one. All right, let's talk about customizing Azure OpenAI. So again, we've got those three primary models. That's not all of them, by the way, but those are the three primary models we have in the Azure OpenAI AI space. Our data could be internal knowledge bases, structured and or unstructured sources, operational transactional data. If this is all in one location, like a data lake or a lake house, this makes it very, very easy. And then my prompts on top of that, I'm going to give it kind of a system instruction. What kind of role do I want you to be able to answer this in? Or only provide answers from the data provided. Or if you can't find the answer, think of those as kind of system saying, hey, model, this is what I want you to do. And above that, go ahead, next slide. That's where the power comes in, is that you're going to be, that's going to set that engine away. I do want to mention this really quick. If you'll notice the meta context. So I can provide, even in a prompt, additional context on what I want to do. You'll notice there's a whole bunch of different things on the left-hand side, and the prompt was write a tagline for our ice cream shop. Well, it's determined that I'm in a Phoenix. I'm actually telling it what I want the response to be safe, free of harm, and non-controversial. And of course, the response is scoops of heaven in the heart of Phoenix. Next one. All right, let's go into a specific example. Now, this is a really good example. So easy comprehension for if anyone's been to a doctor, and especially maybe even a radiologist, you've probably had to get all their information and how the doctor writes down his information and has to explain it to you and everything else. So the idea was, first of all, there's a very large workflow in this system. You got radiologists involved, you got nurses, you've got people, all that stuff that goes from the time the patient engages to the time the patient doesn't. One of the things that we want to ensure is that the patient has a very clear, easy to read understanding of what is going on or what has happened in that process. Next slide will actually go ahead and show what that workflow. So patient scheduling appointment, initial consultation, labs and tests. They go into the imaging process. The radiologist reviews it. By the way, this could and can be automated or utilizing image recognition. Then we actually go into the echo translation. The physician still reviews it. And then we actually have the patient readout that's going to actually have the patient communication and the automated patient follow-up into, say, a CRM system or otherwise. So if you'll go into the next slide, this is literally what it looks like within Azure OpenAI. So this is the AI Studio. The UI has changed just a little bit since then. A couple of things I want to point out. This is able to take and use the data and test my output. So it's completion playground or chat playground, which is right below that. And on the right-hand side, far right, you can see the parameters. So if you take a look, there is a parameter called temperature. And that temperature parameter is the one that it's from 0 to 1, and 1 being the most creative. You're basically saying, I want that thing to be as creative as possible. In this example, and normally a 0.2 to 0.3 is probably where you want to be. By default, I think it starts at 0.7. The other thing is you can also limit the tokens. Remember, tokens are what you're going to be paying for. And you can basically model this so you can actually see what that's going to look like when it comes back. So you're able to work with this straight inside that. So there's an extract from the MRI diagnostic report of the patient, and I'm extracting key relevant information and then sending it back. Next slide, please. I can then tune it, and I can start getting in that. So the MRI, this is output, by the way, that there are some abnormalities in there, blah, blah, boom. Now go into the next one, because it's noticing it's even having links to contents there. This is the patient communication. So this is what the patient's going to do. And by the way, if you'll notice, it's got both English and Spanish. I can also train it or specify, hey, I want this to be at different levels of education. Someone who is a graduate, if a patient actually has graduate education versus someone who may have not even finished high school, you would want different communications between those. Next. So with Microsoft, they've obviously provided a OpenAI landing zone reference architecture. As you can see, this is based off the common hub and spoke. The AI specific services subscription is in the lower center right, and there's a link there directly to it. But if I blow that up, this is what it looks like. You'll notice I have some other things that are there. API management services, APIM, specifically to handle API requests, because that's all that you're really sending there. We've got all the core services available from an Azure perspective. We've got Azure Key Vault. We've got private endpoints. We've got Cosmos DB. By the way, Cosmos DB is a very powerful and should be looked at as your database partner for your AI services. I won't go into detail. I just literally did a presentation for Microsoft a couple of days ago on Cosmos DB for intelligent applications. You see Azure Front Door, again, all these things. Where is this going to be available? And of course, it's in its own subscription or landing zone, if you will. And that's again, kind of what we're going to see. Go ahead. All right, let's talk about a couple more other very simplistic ones, because that is detailed. I've got 3 examples. This is one that's very, very simple, but extremely easy to do. I've got all my documents. I've got forms. I've got expense reports. I've got whatever I'm going to need, and they're in PDF format, and I want to extract data from them and then use that data to be able to feed into my OpenAI service. Proprietary. So I have an OpenAI service that will use my data for that. The forms recognizer, which of course is part of cognitive service as well, goes into cognitive and is fed into cognitive search. So cognitive search does its indexing of that content and makes it available for calls from the web application in Power BI. It's being exposed as a function. That function will then call the API service, return it not only back to the web app or Power BI, but Cosmos DB, because of its new capabilities that were done in earlier this year, can now store it as an optimal storage with vectors on that content. Next one. And so, by the way, that means I can persist that the information that AI produced. This is a call center, contact center analytics using Speech API and Azure OpenAI service. Again, I want to call out, there's a bunch of other services here, not just the AI service. The AI service is that one little piece in intelligent transcription that allows for me to get reports on the sentiment of that calls and or place that information in CRM, so I can my salespeople can look at the account and say, oh, they've had a couple bad calls based on what AI and the engine has produced. Again, this is very simplistic, but a very, very valid one. Imagine being able to trying to do that without some type of AI service. Next. Last one, you can go ahead and go through this whole thing. I'll explain the whole thing at the end. So now, what about enterprise data sources? I've said over and over again. The first one was really good for maybe a simple FAQ or whatever it may be. I think there's one more. There no? Nope. Okay. Thank you. And so I've got a document library sitting in SharePoint or OneDrive or whatever that may be. And it could have all sorts of files. By the way, that document chunking function, I will mention this just because you'll see this over and over again. When our enterprise search, especially cognitive search, that's what happens when I'm indexing content, is it chunks it. I would love to say that chunks are very similar to, in fact, I will say that chunks are very similar to tokens. This is why it breaks that down, but then it's being broken down so that the AI engine, that data can be inferred into that piece. That's what the search index really is chunks. And then I have different sections and search queries, and you'll notice that there's a prompt there feeding Azure OpenAI, and I'm able to do summarizations, Q&As, and references. By the way, there's a question that popped up about, oh, doggone, this is what it does when it takes a Teams call, takes all the transcript of that Teams call, and then does all the sentiment and summarization. Go ahead, next slide. All right, I took this slide out, but I put it back in moments before. And the only reason I did was we had a specific question on what about Azure Gov? Well, Microsoft has provided guidance on how we use OpenAI with Azure Gov. You'll notice we're talking about at least 2 different tenants, one on the Azure Gov side where your data sits, and one in the Azure Commercial that all it has is the OpenAI service and the API. Now, there's a couple other things that have to do, but this is really, there is architectural guidance. We're working with the customers right now and doing and implementing these because a lot of our clients do have Azure Gov tenants. The big thing I would say is you need to ensure no data is logged on the commercial side, even from the API utilization perspective, and that is literally how I'm kind of skimming over this. If you have questions on this, please get with your cloud strategist and let us know. We'll be glad to kind of go over this. This is a definitely a good use case. All right, next slide. I think that takes us to where I can get to my questions. Oh yes, general guidelines. So when we're talking about utilizing this, these are just a couple things. Know your audience, be clear. In other words, remember, shape your prompt to match what their needs are. Stay focused, promote creativity. Again, depending on your use case, refine iteratively, add the external data, cite the work when you use it. I put utilize GPT-4 because it is richer and accurate content, but it depends on the use case. A couple of these do depend on the use case. Next slide. I put in here some helpful hints around creating prompts. So guidelines, the triple hash code pound and triple quotes to basically kind of do some of these things. There's a couple things here, like the rule number 2, write a short story for kids. No, write a funny soccer story for kids that teaches a kid that persistence is key for success in the style of J.K. Rowling because they like Harry Potter. This is a proper, those are proper prompts. There's another slide, one more. And that goes into the last 4 that I kind of did. This gets into a little bit more. So the last one is, how do I get started? First, make sure you are gaining literacy across the organization. Don't just be that one person. I can't specify how important number 2 is if you plan to utilize AI for your organization. Get your data state AI ready with Azure. And that is, again, very, very important because you're going to want it, if you don't, and it's not just for this, but should already be something that should be a priority. And then finally, design intelligent app experience with Azure AI. Very, very do. And then go ahead and go to the next slide, which I believe is the last one for, and then resources. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, so I can get to those questions.
Questions is next. Yep. Let's go to the questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's
so
go
lots
ahead
of resources there.
Thank you very, very much. So going back to the questions, I'm going to go ahead and start putting some links in here to the chat. So the first one is timing on Copilot for GCC. Well, one, Microsoft hasn't announced it. We don't have it. And that the other question is always that follows on is, what's the timing on Azure OpenAI for GCC as well? We don't have those. If I was I won't even say that here on a recorded one. But you can expect it. I would expect that this is a very, very big, high priority. Now, the challenge with this is because the AI technologies are so they can touch so many things. It's the accreditation it's taking time and would take time. Can I restrict the use of AI-powered meeting notes, Teams Premium, by invited participants in my team meetings? So when we talk about AI-powered meeting notes, we're talking primarily, I believe we're talking about Copilot. Remember
Teams Premium, the Teams Premium license, which is a little bit different, uses AI.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have an answer on that. I've reached out to Microsoft, but I would say probably not, since they're coming in from, I assume that the intent of this is external participants. Because it says invited participants.
Yep.
So I'm working on an answer. We'll get it in the follow-up that Casey will put out.
The next one is MS Privacy or Microsoft Privacy with Bing Chat and GPT models in Azure. I am going to put several different links in here. And Safety of the Chat GPT Enterprise Edition. I'm assuming you were asking about OpenAI Chat GPT, not the Azure one, because we did talk about that. And then how do we know questions and data we put in the AI is secure and not used for commercial? I told you, you've got to be very careful on what you're using. I also, hopefully I specified very clearly which ones would be what I consider to be safe in that as well. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and put in is, since it was Bing Chat Enterprise, I think it was actually Copilot. So I'm putting in here a link on Copilot privacy data. Next one was Bing Chat Enterprise.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll put that as, and by the way, these are not boring information. This is good if those were questions that you had. With that, I am going to thank you all for attending. I apologize for just going a minute or two over, and turn it back over to Ken.
Yeah, we're going to post this last, thank you, Miguel, appreciate all that information. We're going to post this last poll question. Just want to know how we did today. Was it useful, helpful? So a scale 1 to 5, let us know, please. And then obviously reminding folks of the all the You Already Own It sessions. Miguel talked a lot about getting your data house in order. We have 3 sessions on that core data platform, making the move to possibly platform as a service with your SQL licensing, analytics and intelligence, enterprise data governance. So obviously getting that data house in order is the first step pretty much to everything moving forward. And then that's it. Really, we want to thank you for your time today. We're sorry we went a little over, but that's a wrap. And I want to thank Miguel Wood and all of you for joining us today. If you have follow-up questions, since we ran out of time, please go ahead and email the You Already Own It at go-planet.com email address that's in the chat, and we'd be happy to follow up with you on any topics from today or anything that you want to bring up question-wise. Thanks again. Thanks for joining us.